So just quickly be a little bit about myself. I've been writing code since 1968. I still write code. But also, probably even more important, I'm also a change agent. So companies usually bring me in to make radical changes to the organization from within. And so that's what I typically have done. So in fact, one of the CTOs who hired me a few years ago basically explained my role to his vice president. He described me as the hand grenade he's throwing into development. So I tend to have some very radical ideas at this stage in my career, and programmer anarchy is one of these. So let me quickly just define programmer anarchy. So if you look at programmer anarchy, it really is an agile process. So you look at the manifesto, every aspect of the Agile Manifesto, we believe in and we execute against. So, checks on all those things. One of my more favorite lists is the XP values. This is how I live and breathe development, is around these XP values. And these came from Kent Beck originally. And again, in Programmer Anarchy, we believe in all of these. Where it gets a little different is in roles. So if you look at a traditional Agile project, you probably have some pretty well-defined roles around there. You have the customer, the project manager, the analysts, the testers, developers, et cetera. And the nice thing is we've kind of consolidated developer to be a role versus the thousands of different little titles we used to have for database developer and this sort of developer and this sort of architect and this sort of designer. We've kind of consolidated those as developer, which is really good. But if you look at anarchy, we have customers and developers, but we kill off the other roles. We get rid of the BAs, get rid of the QAs. We get rid of the project managers as well. And in particular, we actually got rid of the managers of the programmers in these organizations as well. There are no managers of the programmers. So what you're creating here is a managerless team. But being social animals ourselves, it tends to work because as social animals, we tend to want to organize ourselves. So unless you happen to be a sociopath, are you a sociopath? A sociopath would say no. Unless you're a sociopath, you want to organize yourselves. You want to you pick your leaders, et cetera. And that turns out to be very powerful to let these groups do that on their own. So why do you want to do this? I mean, what are you trying to accomplish by restructuring your team this way? One way to explain what's going on is to look at this Cynefin framework, which came from a guy named Dave Snowden. If you ever get a chance to listen to Dave Snowden, and he's got some great YouTube videos, talk about this. It's well worth your 5 or 10 minute segments he has. And what Dave did was he divided the world into basically different types of problems that you're trying to solve. He defined simple problems as those that have a straightforward cause and effect. So if I'm writing a payroll program and I want to figure out, if you work 40 hours at $15 an hour, I should pay you $600. That's a pretty easy thing to do. That's easy cause and effect relationships. He also said they're complicated problems, like when you start talking about union dues and different state tax records and deductions and stuff like that, it gets more complicated. So it pays to have an expert, but there is still a cause and effect relationship. But Dave didn't stop there because he saw some other types of problems out there that he called complex and chaotic. And complex problems, basically, you can't tell what the cause and effect relationship is. Yes, if something happens, you can go back and see why it happened, but it's not a predictor of the future. And so this concept of having the managers teach you how to do it correctly, or even the concept of best practice, is out the window. Something that works 2 months in a row doesn't work on the third month. And you have to have almost no memory of this. It's like a baseball pitcher that just threw a home run ball. He's got to forget that and pitch again. And so you organize yourself differently because there's no concept of an expert here. And chaotic is when I have no idea what a cause and effect is. It's just things are happening. It turns out that most of the domains that we play with around now tend to be more the complex nature. Now, Dave also talks about disorder. He says most problems, you don't know what type of problem it is. If you watch how the problem acts, it will tell you what type it is. You can help classify that. In fact, he would say 85% of the time, you don't know what the problem really is until you sort of watch it for a while and see how it's acting. Is it acting unpredictably? Is it acting very predictably? You want to distinguish that. He also points out a prejudice. As individuals, we have a preference for which of these quadrants we like to play in. If you're a politician, it's simple. Everything is simple. Elect me, I'll fix it, even though it's not really true. Now myself, I tend to like the other side of the chart. I like to play in the complex and chaotic world because I find this really fun, that there are no rules. That's kind of my nature. But you got to be careful not to drag a problem into your segment when it doesn't really fit. So it turns out most of the interesting problems they're working on today are not payroll. We solved that problem many, many years ago. We're doing recommendation engines. We're trying to figure out what you like, what you don't like, what sort of ads will work for you, etc. And these are complex problems. The cause and effect relationships are not there. Somebody can claim they're an expert in this area, and they're probably lying. So this is one reason you have these teams organized this way is because the problems don't let you define the experts and put the roles in place because they can't exist in your environment. Another reason why this is emerging as a very good idea, and that is the competition is coming. In fact, at this conference, you are the competition. Look at those myriad of booths out there. What's really happening here is you have a lot of guys that are basically, because of technology, can now go attack businesses that have been established many, many years. Cloud computing has eliminated the need for me to go out and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on machines and plan that thing 6 months ahead of time. That's gone. I got great bandwidth between connecting things. I can connect every individual through their cell phone or tablets. I have much better languages and frameworks to build higher and higher level abstractions. So all that stuff that big companies used to have that kept the competition away, they're evaporating for technology reasons. But also, there's also opportunities popping up. If you look at Silicon Valley, and as I talk to a lot of CEOs and CTOs, they kind of, big companies, they're like, how do I get into this Valley tech? What is Google doing that's different than I'm doing? You sort of say, well, first of all, they organize themselves differently. They don't have a big, giant relational database that Larry Ellison owns running their enterprise. They're doing different sorts of things like that. These are things that the startups are doing, that are taking advantage of. And therefore, the barriers for competition for these large companies are evaporating. And that's why they need to go faster. So when you talk about managing managerless teams, and wow, the layout didn't work here. That red line should be different. We're talking about supporting, motivating, and building these teams. It's not, you can't really manage your managerless team. It is a contradiction. And so when I put these things together, you don't try to manage these things. You support them, you motivate them, and you put them together. So let's talk about some of these things. First of all, if you put one of these teams together and then you try to manage it, it's not going to work. You have a view that says, if I got all these guys together, this herd of cows, if I just herd these programmers in the right direction, it'll all work really well. Of course, what's really going on is you're not herding cows, you're herding cats. And it's going to be very, very unsuccessful. In fact, if anything, you're going to demotivate this team you put together. You put them together, they organize themselves, and then you start trying to tell them how to work. And that's not why you put them together. So resist the temptation, as strong as it may be, to try to manage these teams. Now, within the team, you do need to have roles. There are certain things you want to make sure you have the talent into the team to allow you to do these things. You do need leaders, and groups will pick leaders. Leadership is something that you're empowered by the team. I can't name somebody a team leader and all of a sudden make them effective. The title doesn't make that work. It's the rest of the team members giving you that authority to make the decisions, respecting your thoughts about that. You definitely need technical experts, and we tend to err on the side of what I consider to be poly-skilled workers or full-stack developers, as they sometimes call them. I like everybody to be able to do a little bit of database design and understand what a web page looks like and how to construct them. Don't have to be experts, but competent in these things. Of course, the DevOps is an emerging role in this environment. It's an emerging because this team is responsible for deploying their own code. If you go to Netflix and listen to Adrian Cockcroft talk about the Netflix system they built, one of the things he says is, as a programmer, you're responsible for the code, not to get it on the machines. You're responsible until it comes off the machine. From the time you start writing it till the time it comes off that machine, that's your code. And that's the attitude you want to build these teams around as well. And finally, there's a really key role I like to call ambassador. And this is the guy who walks to the other parts of the organization and helps them understand what they need to happen. He's the guy that's talking to the other teams or the other parts of the organization. He's the ambassador. But like an ambassador, he cannot make decisions for his team. He needs to bring the information back and help them understand what's going on. So he's not out there making decisions, which many managers try to do for the team without the team's input. He's the ambassador. He's not authorized to make decisions for them. So that's a very important role as well. And these are roles, not jobs. It doesn't have to be one person who, by the way, I'm the ambassador. It's a role he plays. It's a role that can be morphed around and basically shared among the team as well. But you need to have these roles in the team somewhere. And it could be, 3 or 4 people have them. It could be 6 or 8 people have them. But you need these roles in the team. There are some supporting roles outside the team that are kind of important. One is one I call the visionary. This is the guy that has some idea what we're trying to accomplish. I don't call him necessarily the customer, although he usually is a customer. But he's not necessarily the guy that's going to do that. There's another role I call concierge. He's the guy that's there to help support the team. The team needs a certain skill, the concierge will get it for them. If they need a new LAN adapter, the concierge will get it for them. And if somebody doesn't work in this team, that's the concierge's problem. Let's get him off the team, not my team's problem. So it's a very important supporting role out there for doing that. But again, he's not in charge of the team. He works for the team. You also need to rethink how you're interacting with your customer, that visionary, as a team. So a few years ago, in fact, quite a few years ago now, we drew this pyramid, myself and a colleague at ThoughtWorks, and we said there's really a sort of a pyramid of requirements in this world. And it starts out with the concept of a story. And most people talk about stories, and we take stories, we break them down to tasks. But we said there are also some higher tiers. Stories are part of some overall feature you're trying to implement. And the feature is itself probably some part of some project. And a project, some sort of initiative. Now, almost all the Agile processes talk about interacting with your customer at the story level. And what I've discovered over the years, and I've been doing Agile since about 88 or 89, is that although we talk about interacting with a story, I've seen a lot of organizations drift down and try to micromanage the efforts. Like, what tasks did you work on yesterday? How long did it take you? Did it finish on time? What task are you going to work on today? Sort of getting into the heads of the programmers trying to micromanage the effort. When in fact, you want to do the opposite. What you really want to do is raise the level of interaction. I don't want to talk to you about it at the story level. Tell me what feature you want to accomplish, and then get out of my way. And that's a very powerful thing for these teams. So, a case study of that, one more thing about building the team. So what do you about teams themselves? You see a lot of organizations build teams around project concepts. So here's a project, let's bring in a team and build the team around that. What they fail to realize is it's a bit like musical chairs. Is that when you put a new team together, and with well-intentioned with your spreadsheet, there is a gelling time for the team. They have to figure out who's leading and who's got responsibilities for certain things, who's the experts. There's that, and it's an almost 3 to 6 week process to do that. And it's pretty unpredictable how long it takes. You really want to do the opposite. You want to keep that team functioning together and bring the work to the team. If you've got a new vision for these team, a new visionary, bring them to the table. Interact with them that way. You don't want to keep breaking these teams up. And partly because projects are now running shorter and shorter. So it used to be a project was going to be a 3-year thing. I used to work at IBM, we had 3-year projects. Okay, maybe it makes sense to build a project team then. We're getting to the point now you're delivering several times a week, or sometimes even several times a day for a given project. Project team doesn't make sense in that. Let's reform a team for a 1-week effort. Not worth the overhead. So rethink that about bringing a team that's really working well together, leave them together. Bring the new problem to them. So again, the case study I was going to talk about, this is a London trading house. They trade lots and lots of money. It's one of these environments you think would be very, very prone to try to avoid risk, et cetera. In fact, what they did was each day trader had a couple of programmers assigned to him. It's a very typical structure. But in this particular one, the focus was developers, you need to understand what trading is all about. And they wasted a lot of time training the programmers to understand the domain. And the result was, about 6 months later, you look at the 3 people working, you couldn't tell who the programmer was and who the trader was. In fact, programmers would have new ideas, traders would have new ideas. it was almost role-less in some respect. And this is the idea of raising that level of interaction, not trying to tell the programmer what to do, but let's share the domain, let's interact at the feature level. So how do you support this vision of what you're trying to accomplish? Because to a large degree, trying to figure out what you're building has always been the problem. And so you got to have a new view of this. So we used to think in terms of the stone tablets. Here are the requirements. I'm going to cut them into stone. I'm going to sign them in blood. This is what I have to be built. And we went through this vision many times. In fact, in the 80s, we had a whole concept of, because of massive failures, we needed to have better tools. So before we had these better tools, basically 2 out of every 3 software projects failed. So in the 80s, we put together lots of tools. We called it CASE, for computer-aided software engineering. We spent lots of money on these tools, and lo and behold, at the end of this, 2 out of every 3 projects failed. It wasn't because of the requirements process. It didn't have to be more rigorous. It's the fact that the requirements are constantly morphing. We sometimes tell the joke about what's the difference between a business analyst and a used car salesman. The answer, used car salesman knows he's lying. Customers don't really know what they want. We've always talked about customer, what he asks for versus what he needs. And you need to sort of accommodate that. So we're moving our vision away from requirements into much quicker moving into trying ideas. Visionary, do you have an idea? Let's try it out. Programmer, I have an idea where we can make some more money. Let's try it out. How fast can we make this happen? This is the way we want to morph the organization to support these managerless teams, solving these complex Kinefin problems. So you have to change how you think about the rest of the organization as well. You can't just hand a managerless team a set of documents and really get the benefits you were trying to get out of that. So one of my companies, the programmers themselves came up with this. I love this expression. Experimentation drives innovation. The word experimentation implies we're going to try things and fail. Failure is expected. It's not going to be something we're going to be unexpected or penalized. And so we must be very careful about making that distinction as well. We don't want to penalize failures. We want to try ideas out constantly. So, team membership. Teams are basically, when they form themselves, they become really families of their own. And so the team becomes responsible for basically recruiting the more people into the team, understanding interviewing them, deciding who they need, training them, and adding additional skills as they need that. That's a team responsibility. But very much like the Survivor show, you can't be voted off the island. A team can say, you're just not working out. And rather than have somebody say, oh, you got to keep trying, you need to train him better, you take him off the team. You give him to the concierge saying, concierge, here's a problem, solve it. And maybe I need better training, maybe there's personality conflict, maybe you need to fire him. But that's not the team's problem. The team said, this is not working, he needs to be off the island. And they vote them off. You got to allow that as well. So, support activities. Coaching, mentoring, and appraisals. These are things managers were supposed to be responsible for. First of all, they're really different activities. And you want to treat them that way. In fact, probably have different people working on these things. Coaching is getting more and more sophisticated now. Coaching is about getting you to realize what you know and don't know and helping you understand that yourselves. It's a process of asking you questions to help you realize these things. It's a much more sophisticated field than it was 30 years ago. It's very sophisticated at this point around coaching. That's a very key skill. You can train people to do that within the team. Mentoring is about, I have a desire to be a better closure programmer. How can you help me? Well, frankly, your manager is not going to be a better closure programmer. In fact, the reason we have a lot of great programmers that became managers is because their one person responsible for mentoring was a manager. And he kept saying, you need to be in management. You need to be in management. You need to be like me. You need to be in management. When in fact, the right role model may have been that really bright programmer. And so you want to establish mentoring as something completely different than this, manager responsibility. And appraisal is, okay, what did you get done? What did you really accomplish in terms of business value? And again, the team is the best place that knows how to do that. This team knows what your contribution was. The knowledge is within that team. You want to harvest that. But you want to separate these activities. You want to not have them at the same day. You don't necessarily have the same person doing them. And again, that's a radical thinking for a lot of organizations where these are all manager responsibilities, where the manager is not going to be the best person for any of these. So how do you motivate individuals to work in this environment? And motivation is a very tricky thing. I worked for a company one time, and it had a very young manager, and frankly, he was all about making money. That's what his passion was. His goal in life was to make lots of money. He's been very successful. He has a net worth around $300 million now, so he did a pretty good job of that. But when he brought us in to be programmers, he said, wow, you know, this is what you promised to accomplish. But if you accomplish more, I promise to buy you an iPod. And if you accomplish even more than that, I'll buy you an iMac. He was thinking this was going to motivate us. I was insulted. It's like, you mean you got to bribe me to work harder and more efficiently for you? I'm here to work hard. That's what I'm going to do. You think you're going to work harder for these gifts and stuff like that? You really don't understand my motivation. And the social scientists say for most people, the motivation for money stops at a certain level, and then the quality of work becomes much, much more important. If you don't really understand that, then you're missing why managerless teams are actually quite productive, because the quality of work is extremely high in these environments. You get to try ideas out. You have a lot of autonomy in these groups. So one of the big problems is we measure programmers on the wrong thing. I'm a programmer. I've been measured on lots of things. And basically, we treat it as a big game. You know, what do you want to measure as a case? Let's play that game. So it used to be we want to measure how many lines of code I can write. Well, you know, I can write lots of lines of code. Or maybe, you know, I've met some development milestones or, you know, various other things. But it turned out when we started making the motivation, the metric of working against was actually something that had business value. Oh, we want to make some more money. We want more clicks. We want more sales. We want more logins. We want more registrations. We started making those the first-class metrics, especially when I'm working at the feature level. All of a sudden, that's our game. And we have amazing ideas about how you can get more people logging in. And we look at that. Did we just put some code out there? Did we get some more logins? Are we getting better retention rate? Are we getting longer page views? We look at the things that count. So if you give me metrics that really count, then I can do a much, much better job of this. And so give them the metrics that count. Show them the business metrics. You think they don't want to see them? Yeah, try it out. You'll actually love what you see. So you know, I tried these ideas out in a startup environment originally. In fact, a startup environment kind of came up with a lot of these environments, and I kind of started talking about them. But then I took these ideas to the opposite extreme. So not a startup company, but a company that was in the online newspaper business. It was the Daily Mail out of London. So if you're not familiar with the Daily Mail, if you want to know what Kim Kardashian's wearing, this is where you go. It's the most popular online newspaper in the world. I think there was 1 month last year where we served up 3.2 petabytes, and that doesn't count video. So yeah, a lot of people read this newspaper, and frankly, it's kind of happy news. You know, it's not about people getting killed. It's about happy news, so it does work really well. Now, this company has been in the tabloid business for a long time, since 1890. In 1890, they were buying stories to put into their paper to sell more tabloids. So they've been in the business a long time. It's also run by Lord Rothermere. If you come from an English heritage like that, it's Lord Rothermere is like, okay, he's Lord. He came around one time to our development team, and we got this memo about here's how you address Lord Rothermere. You don't call him Charlie. You don't say, you know, you got to call him Lord Rothermere or Lord. Lord Rothermere, fourth Lord Rothermere of his title. He runs this thing. So conservative organization. And I was brought in to basically get the state organization moving quicker. So into that organization, I did a lot of the things we did at the startup. First of all, what we need to do is we need to completely rewrite the rendering engine because it was unchangeable at this point. Gigantic Java app per se. And what I found was an agile shop. They said they were agile. They had scrum masters, but they were managing at that task level. Everybody was a specialist. Nobody understood the big system picture. There were over 20 titles for the 50 people in the organization. And I think there were well over 20, actually. And when they didn't deliver, it was like, oh, we got to be very cautious. We got to make sure everything works. And so they were, you know, completely afraid of any possible failures. So what we did was we went in there and basically said, we're going to change your titles. So we're going to get rid of the QA. We're going to get killed off the scrum masters. We're going to kill the managers in general. You got 3 different titles. You're either an expert, you're a poly-skilled system programmer. In other words, you can do lots of things, or you're skilled in one thing at all, as we call it a developer. We put the DevOps embedded in the team, so the team is responsible for their own delivery and stuff. And everybody had a feature they're working on. Each team had their own feature they're working on independently of everybody else. And by the way, 2 CTOs had tried and failed to rewrite the system and been fired. This was the 3rd CTO trying to pull this thing off. Result was we successfully rewrote the system, delivered it early. We were 5 times more productive than they'd ever been before. And morale and learning increased significantly. It was a massive success. And you look at what we did in terms of the technologies. It was, the old system was, in Java and Groovy, Oracle backend, JSPs with tons of code in them, and a big monolithic app. The new vision of these guys, when it turned the programmers loose and say, solve this problem, they pulled out some fancy tools. They used Clojure, they used a lot of Node.js, used a lot of non-SQL databases, RabbitMQ as a message bus. They put mustache templates in place. These are templates that cannot have code in them, but are very portable to running on iPhones, running on web natively, or in fact being manufactured or established in the host themselves. And went to a microservice architecture, which is another thing I talk extensively about. So a completely different structure. As you look at this and say, how could you make this many changes and possibly be successful? And yet they were successful. Because we worked at the feature level, say, here's a problem to solve, and we got out of their way. So, I want to wrap it up at this point, but basically, if you want more information on this topic, Google these topics. So, there's certainly it's a lot of videos and information out there about programmer anarchy. If you Google programmer anarchy, you'll find that. There's a really interesting variation of programmer anarchy called mob programming. There's a guy named Woody Zuhl out of Los Angeles who basically has 6 or 7 programmers with 1 workstation. And he talks about how it turns out to be very effective as well. There's also a lot of complementary topics around microservice architectures. Because a microservice architecture, it makes it easier for the teams to deliver very, very quickly. In fact, at one company I worked in, the startup in London, we were down to the point where we were producing new code into production every 3.5 minutes. Every 3.5 minutes, new code went into production. That's how fast you can go with some of these teams moving this quickly. And that will kill your competition. So that's my story. I think I got just a couple of quick minutes for possible questions, if there are any. Also, I'll be hanging around the conference. You can find me. I love talking about this stuff. Yes, sir.
Yeah. How did you convince a very traditional organization to change in this way? Because the success was not obvious up front, right?
Well, when you have 2 CTOs that have been fired for not doing it right, and one was going to say, I'm going to keep the Oracle database, we're just going to rewrite this stuff. Another guy says, I'm going to use XML and make magic happen. These are really 2 bad ideas. So the 3rd guy comes in and says, okay, well, those didn't work, so what should I try? And fortunately, as far as he was concerned, the CTO had the full authority to make any choice he wanted to. And he was a Node programmer himself, and actually a really good architect. And so I think he created the environment where I can make this happen. And I'm looking for that. If you haven't got that level of support at the executive level, you don't want to try this.
Yeah, I was just curious with the concept of a full stack developer and the front end. Did you have to separate that at all?
That's me. Sorry, it's me.
When you deal with the front end side and that the visual is really important, a lot of times full stack developers can't always, they just can't get that part of it.
Yeah, so if you have a lot of UI componentry and a lot of UI design stuff, there's really 2 things. First of all, you probably do need an expert at that point to help you sort of do that. But once you build something clean, as a programmer, I can clone that. I have a colleague in Australia who basically teaches his programmers just fundamental principles of good design. He makes them competent to understand why it worked. Not trying to make experts, but competent. And all you really need is have competence in the team. And the team will know when they hit the edge of their boundary and go grab that expert. But experts are guys that float around from these managerless teams quite a bit because they bring the expertise they need. You pair with them, you harvest that knowledge, and you kick them out of the team. So that's the way I tend to make it work in the environments I've been in. And by the way, I'm very pragmatic about this stuff. This is stuff I've done. People speculate about it you could do. It's good speculation, but in most cases, I actually have a pretty strong UI design background. I wouldn't say myself an expert, but I certainly understand good UI elements. I've gotten awards for basically cloning other guys' work and making it look good. So I have that sort of competence in there, and as long as you have that, you're in pretty good shape.
Any other questions?
The red light is flashing, so I think I'm supposed to shut up.
I think we have a question.
Yeah, okay.
Did you have a question?
Just quickly, how do you cope with teams where individuals aren't as easygoing or maybe as collaborative as you want them to be? So maybe you've got someone in the old structure who's a product manager or thought they were a product owner that you're putting into these new roles. How do you deal with that? How do you babysit them?
Well, of course, you don't want to babysit them by their very nature. But if you decide you're going to put your feet up and coast, the team will kick you out. I tend to encourage pair programming. Obviously you don't force it, but I tend to encourage pair programming because it transfers skills. But if you got somebody who can't program, you're going to realize it very quickly, and they're going to kick them off the team. And if you're going to put your feet up and sort of tell people what to do and not try to roll up your sleeves yourself, they're going to kick you off the team. I did have one of my early projects when I was in ThoughtWorks. I rolled off the project. Any project I'm on, I'm kind of running the team. I have that gray hair experience. When I left, the project manager was sort of begin to insert himself. He's going to tell people what to do. They fired him. The team kicked him off the team. So yeah, if you try that and you're not contributing, they'll get rid of you. And you got to support that.
Last question.
What is the largest tech team that you've come in and revamped their organization, and what challenges have you faced with doing it with the larger teams?
So I missed the second part of that question. So the size of the team I've typically worked with is about an organization of 50 developers, or I'd say 50 IT people, because we obviously turn them into poly-skilled workers. So that was about where we got to with 4. We had about 50 at the time I left. That was the size we had at the Daily Mail, the online version of the Daily Mail. So I haven't tried this with any larger organization. And I worked in a startup in California right after the Daily Mail, and we brought our team up to 35 programmers using the same sort of thing. We only had one title, developer. I missed the second part of your question.
It was just what challenges you faced with larger teams?
Well, the challenges were different in each organization. In the startup, I made sure we never put the structure in place that sort of begins to establish these roles. So we never hired QA, we never had BAs, and never put project managers in place. I kind of made sure that didn't happen in my role there. And when working with the Daily Mail, I came in there and we actually kicked them out. And with the CTO's blessing, we just eliminate those roles altogether. And in the startup, we built it up from originally just having a single role, the concept of developer. I would say the Daily Mail is more typical of what I would try to do in an organization. I would come and say, we have a new challenge, we're going to write new code in this new project, we're going to have these new titles, do you want to come join us? If you don't want to come join us, I'm sure the legacy code needs you, and it'll need you for many, many years. Stay there. Have your magic roles, have your magic titles. You want to play the new sandpile? Here's the rules. And that seemed to have worked really well.
We're going to leave it there.
All right, thank you.
Fred, thanks very much. Round of applause.
Thank you, guys.